Well, during his inauguration speech on Monday, of course, Donald Trump doubled down on his drill, baby, drill message, promising lots of oil drilling in the United States over the term of his administration, aiming to boost domestic oil supply and to have the U.S. Resume as a major exporter of oil around the world. Here in Canada, there are questions about the future of Canada's oil industry as one of the largest crude exporters to the U.S. We're joined now by Akshay Dubey, Chief Executive Officer of CVW CleanTech. It's a company that serves the Canadian oil sands industry by processing and removing contaminants from tailings from oil sands mining sites. Akshay, thanks a lot for joining us. When you talk to your customers, and those customers would include many of the big players in Canada's oil sands, how do they feel about the current political environment and the potential for a trade tariff situation that would involve oil?
Paul, well, first, thanks for having me on. I'd say generally when you talk to people in the energy industry here, it's obviously a big concern. It is one of the largest exports Canada has down to the U.S. We have a very much an integrated North American energy system. A lot of U.S. refineries, for example, depend on Canadian oil, and this Canadian oil cannot be easily substituted just given the type of oil that it is. For many other regions. The only other regions generally that they can get this type of oil from, which is the medium to heavier crudes, is from places like Mexico and Venezuela. And clearly with Venezuela, there is a view that from this administration coming to the U.S. that that's not a place that they're going to be looking to do business. So when we talk to our customers here, there is a little bit of, I'd say, confusion about where is the substitute going to come from. But at the same time, it's going to be incredibly important that we provide the United States with a deal here that allows them to get this crude in a way that feels like it's improving their trade balance. Because that seems to be the key concern here from an administration perspective. Really, where this will impact Canadian producers is if you do have this type of tariff war take place in North America, we will see Canadian crude get lower prices. I did see something recently from the Alberta government that says for every dollar of lower oil prices, that leads to $600 million of lower revenue for the province. So clearly, it's something that's extremely impactful. We've just had a situation where we've had increased takeaway capacity, lower the differential that Canadian oil producers have to take on in terms of selling their crude, which has been extremely positive for the industry. But having something like this come in, again, will be a negative factor in terms of the price that they're able to get when they sell their crude.
Explain that dynamic to it. Why would a tariff situation affecting Canadian oil shipments to the U.S. result in lower pricing for Canadian oil headed south of the border?
Well, essentially, oil being a global commodity, any differential that takes place in one region is balanced out by supply coming from another region. And so at the end of the day, refiners in the U.S. need to take in a certain amount of crude. There's availability for that crude to come in from different jurisdictions. If all of a sudden that crude is now 25% more expensive coming from Canada, because of these tariffs, that just means supply chains are going to adjust to be able to get them different crudes from different regions to be able to make up for that. Or on balance, they will just pay less for Canadian crude, which means less revenue flowing to Canadian oil and gas producers. Specifically in the U.S., the unique situation is such, as I mentioned, certain refineries, especially in PADD 2, which is the Midwest, which are very much connected to Canadian oil producers through pipeline, are very much dependent on Canadian crude. And so if those supply chains can't readjust, what ends up happening, in fact, is you get a little bit lower pricing on the Canadian end for our producers, but then you also get higher prices at the pump for the U.S. consumers, neither of which is a good outcome in an environment where inflation has been the biggest risk to the global economy.
So you think the big picture is here that Canada's got to find a way to be able to continue to sell its oil into the United States, while at the same time somehow leveling up the trade balance situation with the United States, where the U.S. buys much more from Canada than Canada buys from the United States. Now, people say that's because the U.S. buys a lot of crude oil from Canada. How do we achieve greater balance in the trade deficit?
Well, look, I'd say at the end of the day, we've all heard about Donald Trump and the art of the deal. He's very much a businessman looking to strike a deal here. I think that's part of the reason we didn't see the tariffs come in on day one. He signed close to 100 executive orders on day one, but pushed out the tariffs. I think it's specifically because he's looking for a deal at the negotiating table that allows the United States to improve their trade terms with Canada and Mexico, and does it in a way that doesn't increase prices within the United States, which is essentially a tariff on Canadian oil would do. So I think it's imperative that the Canadian government goes to the table with the view of a negotiation. I think just the threats of counter tariffs are probably not the best path forward, but really thinking about how in a variety of different ways we can show that we are a valued partner for the United States, whether it comes to things like the security of North America or border security, that we're willing to step up to the plate and help them with items like that. That is where I would be thinking about things from a negotiation perspective. Because again, if you just look at the trade balance and you eliminate Canadian energy exports to the United States, we actually have a negative balance with the United States in that we buy more from them. So I'd say the best path forward is really coming to the negotiating table in terms of finding a deal where we can help them on certain areas that are important to them from a domestic policy perspective. And then I think also Premier Doug Ford has had a great perspective in terms of, let's look at Fortress Can-Am or AmCan, where essentially the two countries can work cooperatively together on a whole host of things, including defending the North, critical minerals, and our energy industry to make sure that this is really prosperous for all of us in North America.